After first few weeks of serving as an unwilling mayor of F-037, Frederick van der Zex had a general idea of what to expect from his new job. He had to begin each day at an inhuman hour long before dawn, get ready, and then rush outside to meet with his council, who descended from their airship like some deranged, boring paperwork demigods, bringing with them more and more documents for Fred to sign, and more ideas on how to turn this new urban zone into a true marvel of imperial efficiency. Or so the mayor thought, as he had no idea what he was doing. All that was the reason why Fred was taken completely by surprise when Comrade 2 arrived ahead of the main group one day and said, "Well done on your term, Mayor, but I'm afraid that you're running into debt and it would probably be a good idea to start working on it, unless you want to end up in debtor prison, of course." As expected, this was all a bit unexpected news to Fred, but after the rest of his council arrived from the sky, they were more than eager to explain.
"You see, sir," Comrade 1 began, "as it happens, according to Imperial law, you as the mayor are directly responsible for the financial situation of the city. We have been issued some funds at the start, but they're running out very quickly as we speak."
"Great." Fred couldn't be more annoyed in this foggy dawn. "And how long were you planning to wait before telling me this?"
"We were not planning to say anything at all. We assumed that, as such a high-ranking official, you are fully familiarized with Imperial law."
Fred shook his head in resignation. Aside from the Emperor, who did not count because he was the law, there was not a single person who could fully comprehend that meandering, labyrinthine mess that was Imperial bureaucracy. Even the best ones knew only the tip of the iceberg.
"Very well then, it seems we were mistaken," Comrade 1 continued. "Then allow us to officially reprimand you and draw your attention to the fact that within the next few months the city will run out of funds and Imperial executors will pay you a visit. Shall we do something about it then?"
That wasn't really an offer Fred could refuse, not if he wanted to go on living outside of debtor's prison, and as far as he knew, you never left debtor's prison once you got inside once, so he soon found himself in a truck, with Comrade 2 behind the wheel and Comrades 3 and 5 in the back, driving across the plain south of the city. And it was certainly a colorful group to travel with. As mentioned before, Comrade 2 was a Deadlander, her pale grey body made almost entirely out of muscles and luminescent tattoos, barely hidden by her grey suit. Comrade 3 was a golem, a construct made long ago, using techniques and magics long forgotten and forbidden, for pretty much the same reason why necromancy was now strictly controlled. For, just like the undead, golems too went through a little revolution along the way when, seemingly out of nowhere, these mindless automatons suddenly developed sentience. Although without pretentiousness of the zombies, skeletons and ghouls. Golems might have woken up from their brain-dead slumber, but after a week or two they realized they liked working, and so they calmly returned to their workshops and factories and resumed their work, only now they asked, very politely, to be paid for it. It was their way of dealing with pretty much anything. They were extremely patient, extremely polite, and if things became dangerous, they were also made out of stone and metal, and so could always beat the crap out of anyone who objected, while apologizing all the time, of course. Some factory owners learned that the hard way when they tried to force their constructs back into unpaid labor, but after very few spectacular and polite murders, during which some of the victims were found all over the provinces, most capitalists realized that it's cheaper to just give golems their wage and not risk having what they like to call a calm and peaceful disagreement. So, Comrade 3 was relatively common sight, even for Fred, who spent over a decade living with just his wife far away from civilization, but Comrade 5 was a whole other story. He, she, or maybe they? It was hard for Fred to describe, but the creature that was now sitting behind him in the truck didn't look like anything he's seen before. Comrade 5's head looked like a deer's skull, complete with antlers, and their mouth was, well, the least said about it the better. Suffice to say, Fred's head was spinning every time he looked at his horned aide, but at least Comrade 5 was quiet, as in, it never talked, and just like his golem companion, seemed polite to the extreme. All in all, this bizarre company would look out of place pretty much anywhere, but it stood out even more in this empty meadow, with buildings of new, rapidly growing hive district looming in the distance. "Right then," Fred asked after Comrade 2 stopped the car and told everyone to get outside. "Lovely place for a picnic, that, but is there any reason we're here? Or is this the moment where you hand me a shovel and tell me that's my only way to avoid prison?"
"Nothing so drastic,"
Comrade 2 replied, and then, because she was a Deadlander, she added,
"though it can be arranged, of course."
Not really, miss,"
Comrade 3 said, shuffling alongside them.
"Mr. Mayor, please excuse my colleague's green sense of humor. She can't help it. But as to why we're here, I wanted to check something that may bring some money into our budget."
With that, the golem plunged its hand into the ground and then, like a sommelier tasting the finest wine, it brought it back in front of its rocky face.
Yes, rich bouquet, healthy earthworms, very fertile."
Then, to Fred's surprise, he picked one of the worms from the mass of dirt and slurped it down like a noodle.
9 out of 10 would recommend. This will be very good for our plan, Comrade 2. And yet I detect a hint of something I cannot quite place.
"Corpses?"
Comrade 2 provided an answer, causing Comrade 3 to spit dirt all over the place.
"A battle took place in this field well over 2 centuries ago when Federation tried to invade us. Lots of cannons, lines, and soldiers in colorful uniforms and white tights, and even now I can still smell gunpowder in the air."
Fred looked around, now with his eyes of veteran soldier, which he kept in another pocket, and finally noticed it. There were some mounds and holes around the field that, while mostly either eroded or filled out over the years, still indicated placements of trenches and cannon positions. He remembered reading about the war, but had no idea one of the battles took place so close to his home. Still, as soon as he realized that, he turned back to Comrade 2. "Now I see. You want us to look for trinkets and antiques underground, at it? We could probably get a decent amount of money if we dug up a cannon or some muskets, except we're not gonna do that. Teach me to never rob corpses of fallen comrades in the army, and I'm not about to start now." Deadlander woman raised an eyebrow at this and shook her head.
"Sorry to say, Mayor, but that's not even close to what I had in mind. And besides, don't try to pretend like you're some saint who wasn't rifling through this battlefield before. I saw those cannons standing around your house."
"That's different. I ordered them online after I moved here. Some of the neighbors were awfully loud in the night."
"I see. So these cannons are the reason why all homes in Redville, save for yours, have holes in them?"
"I value my privacy," Fred said, in a tone that clearly indicated end of discussion. "But that's not time or place to talk about it. If we're not here to look for old mementos, then why?"
"To get some money going, of course. As Comrade 3 said, we have really high-quality soil here thanks to all the soldiers who so kindly fertilized the place for us 2 centuries ago. So we thought that the best way to get some cash quick is to use what we have and turn this place into a full-on agricultural zone. Get some cloning vats going and grow whatever you people eat. Not only will it help us feed the growing city, it will also allow us to save a lot on imports from other places."
"Ah, the joys of centrally planned economy," Fred said, without even a hint of sarcasm in his voice.
"Why yes, that's why this empire is all about. Aside from that though, with ground so fertile, it's probably only a matter of time until we hit some surplus, which we can then sell to someone else and make even more money that way. We're close enough to the Southern Ocean so we can provide what they can't grow themselves, though at the same time we're also close enough for locusts to come for a visit, so we'll have to keep everything under a roof, and install a few dozen flamethrowers around the place for good measure."
Fred wasn't sure it would be good enough though, not against locusts from the south. Unlike regular garden variety locusts, which were domesticated and used as filler in 90% of Imperial food for decades now, crimson locusts from across the Southern Ocean were a bit more dangerous. First and foremost, they were the only creatures that lived beyond said ocean, in a dark, empty place called simply the Void, which meant that they were, by nature, resilient as hell and capable to adapt to pretty much anything, to the point that they were able to absorb energy from lightning and power lines and discharge it at unsuspecting farmers and their animals. But the worst part was their intelligence. A single locust wasn't a problem, 100 were a nuisance, but once their numbers grew in tens of thousands, something bizarre happened and, in a way no imperial scientist or sorcerer could explain, intelligence of these locusts grew exponentially with their swarm. The more numerous their nomadic horde grew, the smarter they became, to the point that some swarms discovered metalworking and started building rudimentary towns beyond the water. This meant that dealing with them was a lot more problematic than dealing with any other pest, but fortunately that intelligence was also their main limiting factor. Once a single swarm grew large enough to develop consciousness and sapience, it inevitably every single time started plotting against other swarms, how to either destroy or absorb them. But when two such swarms met in battle, during which smarter ones were known to use small siege engines and firebombs, both sides were so determined to take each other over that both always took extreme casualties, and the more insects died, the stupider their respective hive minds became. Most of the battles between Crimson Locusts ended with both sides unbraining themselves so much that ultimately they all simply stopped fighting, for they lost all the capacity to remember why they were even fighting for. Which meant that, while these insectoid visitors from the south were a deadly nuisance, it was usually only a matter of time before they turned on themselves, but people still dreaded an idea of a single swarm dominating every single one.
Makes sense, but I don't think flamethrowers will be well received,
Comrade 3 said.
Not if we want to avoid certain friendly disagreements.
Ah yes, you see, the worst part wasn't the locusts themselves, their fanboys were a lot worse. Some time ago, when Imperial Academy published its findings about their hive-minded nature, a bunch of crazies decided that if these bugs can often be smarter than some humans, they deserve citizen rights. The government tried to stamp this movement out, but just like objects of their adoration, these so-called bugheads were strong in large numbers and hard to kill, so it didn't really stop them from protesting in every single town around the Empire every time they felt their locust waifus were treated without proper respect. In fact, knowing them, Fred fully expected a bunch of those weirdos to be within his city already, and so with a heavy heart he had to agree with Comrade 3. A shame, for having a bunch of flamethrowers is always better than not having them.
Anyway, Comrade 2 continued, getting an agri zone going early will help us in the long run, especially since we already see a lack of certain exotic foods. For example, did you know that yesterday some famished Firelander tried to eat Comrade 1?
Oh no, Fred said, his voice dripping with sympathy. What happened to this poor Firelander? He got arrested for assault on government official?
You could say that, Comrade 2 replied with a malicious smile like a shark. He got hired. The administration is always in need of ground-level clerks to push some papers around and fill some spreadsheets. The Firelander can now use his temper in service of a great empire.
Fred tried to imagine this man surrounded by endless stacks of papers and shivered. The brain refused to even try to imagine how such punishment/employment would look. Some fates are truly worse than death. Okay, fine, he said, trying not to feel sympathy for this eternally imprisoned Firelander. Agri-zone's a good idea. But why did we have to come all this way here to figure it out? And why did we bring Comrade 5 along if he's not even doing anything? That got a creepy chuckle out of Comrade 2.
Oh, you would think so, but he's actually the one who can make this venture even more profitable for us. As I said, this place was a battlefield, which means that right now we are surrounded by spirits of all the soldiers who have fallen here. This is a field of death, and the dead keep it. And as it happens, Comrade 5 isn't actually a part of Ministry of Urbanization. He is from Ministry of Postmortem, and his abilities include talking to the dead.
Fred, who was not looking at Comrade 5 for several minutes now, turned around and saw that his antlered counselor sliced its own hand open with a knife and used the blood to smear an uneven circle on the grass. Suddenly the sun vanished behind clouds and thick fog emerged from below ground, with otherworldly shapes twisting and turning inside it, just at the edge of Mayer's vision. Fred's army experience desperately tried to tell him to drop prone or retreat, but he fought the urge, even as he started hearing musket salvos and cannon barrages echoing in the thick fog. And why do we even try to talk to them? He asked, trying to force primal fear away.
It's not like our Empire actually cares about the dead, something we proved during the revolution. Do we want to, I don't know, exorcise them from here? I don't think farmers will enjoy walking in such conditions," he added, as ghostly cannonball flew right by his head and crashed into rows of ghostly soldiers behind him, causing the wraiths to screech even more.
"And where would we profit in that, Mayor?" Comrade 2 asked, eyeing the battle with gleaming eyes. Deadlanders lived for combat, and anyone could see that she was itching to rush in and join one of the sides. Eventually, though, she shook her head and added, "No, we're here to hire them." You would expect that Fred would be surprised by such an idea, but after being part of Imperial bureaucracy for even a short while, he already expected something like that, so he simply said,
"Right, what for?"
Ideally, it would be best to actually raise their bodies as undead workers, but they died so long ago they probably all turned into dust already. So, with that out of the question, Locust protection is the first thing that comes to mind. Ghosts like these troopers can't really manipulate large or heavy things on the material side of things, but they're still more than enough to smack some bags around if they ever show up. Should certainly offer some change from replaying the same battle over and over again for all eternity.
And they could also talk to local worms and convince them to move closer to make ground even more tasty, Comrade 3 proposed, and then, after a second of silence, he added, "Though I'm not sure if even all the earthworms in the world can wash away the taste of a corpse." "This is all fine and well," Fred interrupted this brainstorming session, "but they still need to agree to that first, and as far as I can tell, they're not really happy to see us here." And indeed, several dozen ghostly muskets were pointed at them, and some of the more eager wraiths were already fixing bayonets, seemingly forgetting about their regular hostilities to unite against the living. Comrades 2 and 3, however, were not looking intimidated in the slightest. "Comrade 5 has something to convince them," the grey-faced woman said. "An offer they can't refuse, if you will. In your hands, Fiver." The antlered bureaucrat gave her a look no one could really understand and shook its head, indicating that it might have felt slightly insulted by this violation of protocol. However, as more and more ghosts appear around them, some of them even dragging cannons behind, Comrade 5 decided to focus on the task at hand. With a single swipe of its long, branch-like arm, it extinguished all candles it placed beforehand in the magic circle, plunging entire field into near pitch-black darkness. "Soldiers of the Empire?" A voice emerged from within the skull, with its mouth remaining motionless. "Soldiers of the Federation, lower your voices, for we have come to parley with your generals." That gave ghosts a bit of a pause. The overall feel of kill the living was still in the air, but on the other hand, soldiers' honor was still a powerful thing, and so, reluctantly, muskets were lowered and bayonets were unfixed, and after a few moments of hushed conversations, not really whispering, cause wraiths were used to wail as loud as they could, the crowd of undead soldiers opened up and produced a very fancy-looking ghost striding on a skeletal flaming horse. "Whoa there, Fluttershy,"
the undead officer said, forcing its mount to stop right in front of Comrade 5, who looked completely unfazed by this whole spectacle.
"You called, clerk, and here I am. Say what you must and let us return to our battle."
"I will, but I'd rather not repeat myself, so we'll wait for Federal Commander as well."
"No need,"
the officer said, jumping down from its menacing horse, which was now menacingly chewing on some ethereal grass.
"I was also in charge of Federal Army in this battle, so speak now before I lose my patience."
"The hell?" Fred could not believe his ears.
"You let soldiers from both sides in one battle? How did that work?"
This, to surprise of the living, actually got the spirit a little bit embarrassed.
"Federation's a new entity without many professionals,"
he said, fumbling with his ornate, feathered hat to hide embarrassment, but even his dead white face was blushing a bit.
Empire, on the other hand, was always focused on doing business and making money, so they rented me and some of my fellow officers to the rebels for a price. Unfortunately, there was some mix-up in the documents, which meant I was still serving Empire as well, so I resolved it by switching sides every 15 minutes. Alas, my tactical genius turned out to be a source of my own downfall.
Within few hours, my brilliant command reduced both armies to mere handfuls of fighting men, and when the time to switch sides again came, the winning side was already storming the final positions. I tried to fend them off, but it was a forlorn hope by that point." Hearing that made something suddenly click in Mayor's head.
Wait, I remember reading about this battle. It took almost a year for both sides to figure out what happened to their armies because literally every single soldier from both sides died in this field.
Ah, and my final shot found its mark after all. The general's ghost seemed quite pleased with himself. Then you could say I performed my duty most admirably for both sides. And so, it is a pleasure to reenact this battle time and again. So allow me to get back to it, living ones.
Not so fast, Comrade 5 interceded. We haven't brought you back just to talk. You mentioned your duty, so it is time to prove how loyal you truly are. For we are here to hire both you and your men back into Imperial service.
The Wraith let out a cold, dreadful laugh and said, "Hire us. We're dead. Haven't we sacrificed enough for our homelands by dying in this field?"
No. As citizens of the Empire, you are still bound by its laws, no matter your current state. And as Code of Laws says, nor death, nor dismemberment, nor banishment into different reality is an excuse for unmet work quotas. You have been having fun with your battle for 2 centuries, but now it's time to return to the fold and truly show His Majesty your devotion.
After saying that, Comrade 5 turned around and pointed to a massive book he wore like a backpack, a sight that caused all Wraiths to step back and shriek in terror. "But not all of us are Imperial citizens. Some of us, including me for about half of the campaign, were fighting for the Federation." The general was not giving up.
Incorrect, Antlet Bureaucrat replied. The battle took place less than a year from the start of the rebellion, so by law you were still Imperial citizens when you died, and the Empire now commands you to serve once more.
"Never!" the general shrieked, raising his ethereal blade. "Death freed us from such servitude, and you shall not chain us again!" As was said, spirits like him couldn't really affect much on material plane, but with enough focus they could still cause living a lot of harm. And so, with all his might, the general lowered his blade, cutting off Comrade 5's head in one brutal swing. Fred and his fellow bureaucrats could only watch in horror as it sailed through the air, leaving behind a trail of black blood. It splashed to the ground several meters away, but the mayor did not see it, for he was already being surrounded by more and more angry spirits. But as the spectral soldiers raised their muskets, Antlet Head spoke up again.
"Aren't you forgetting something, General?"
Comrade 5 said from the ground as his body was crawling towards its severed head.
"Nor death, nor dismemberment, nor banishment into different reality is an excuse for unmet work quotas. I do not have His Majesty's permission to die, but as for you and your troops, he ordered you to serve again, personally."
And with that, Comrade 5 stood up back again, as if his mortal wound never happened. With a dramatic gesture, it reached beneath its coat and pulled out a piece of paper, adorned with a seal that made everyone step back in awe. Seeing it, Wraith shrieked in terror, but it was already too late. The document was now officially made legal, and so all spirits in this old battlefield were bound by it until it was revoked. It took ghostly soldiers about a second to understand what just happened, and they all started dropping their weapons.
"You may keep your muskets, soldiers,"
Comrade 5 said, stepping away from the document that was now glowing ominously with dark crimson light and floating in the air about 2 meters above ground.
"For you will need them to defend our fields from insectoid invaders from the south. Your skills and your tactical brilliance, General, will surely come in handy in years to come. Also, chin up, since your bodies are all decomposed. We only need you to show up to work in spirit."
There was a collective grunt at this poor joke from both living and the dead, after which all spirits started to dissipate, no doubt already preparing to take defensive positions and await the locusts. The general tried to slink away as well, but Comrade 5 grabbed him by the arm, somehow, and sternly told him to wait.
Your troops may go, of course, but as a commanding officer you need to ensure paperwork is in order,
Hornskull said.
Comrade 3, would you be so kind?
The golem stepped forward, carrying several crates of papers that, when arrayed on top of each other, formed a tower of documents 4 meters tall. The general looked at it with utter terror in his ghostly eyes, but Comrade 5 said reassuringly, "Not to worry, you will be done with it in no time. First we'll go through company rosters, then we'll check logistical manifests, and then..." The pained shriek of the broken spirit was mercifully cut short by a sudden crashing sound when, out of nowhere, a massive greenhouse suddenly appeared in the field, followed soon by a road.
"Looks like Mr. Pernicle is already on the task,"
Comrade 2 said, pointing towards Chained Construction Wizard. Another comrade, Fred believed she was either 8 or 9, was holding his chains, yanking them every now and then to remind Pernicle to focus on his job.
"Guess we can leave it to him then,"
Comrade 2 continued, as several bizarre, bulbous, meaty and swaying tentacle-like plants emerged from underground around them.
"We should have that dent in our budget fixed in no time, Mayor. Good job."
Fred nodded, even though he didn't really do anything, and followed his aides back to the truck. He was saved from quite literal eternity in debtor's prison, but he still felt a creeping sense of dread in the back of his head. And he was right. The budget might have been fixed, but he was still far from done, for very soon he would have to face one of the greatest nightmares of city planning, an unkillable, insatiable and truly insane demon of public transportation.